Okay, so here is what we're going to do. I'm going to show you how to write a function that will display the arrays in our global array. Okay, and then at the end I'll tell you what the challenge that I want you to do. And like week 3, when you post, say, hey, I need help, or hey, my code works, here's what I did, here's how I approached it, because trust me, there's many approaches to the way I'm about to do this. I have just one. Okay, so this is where we left it, right? Is at this point, I am running it here, right? We know that we have an array, right, that's a nested array. Okay, so what we have here is we have one array that has 3 items, and each of those items is another array, so a nested array. So if we were to try to look at one, and I showed you this before, right? So if we wanted to look at the last one, right, we'd do this. That would show us just that array, and each array has 5 items in it. Okay. So this is the kind of perfect situation to learn about iteration. Okay, and I gave you that link. I forgot to post it, but I will before you see this about being introduced to it. But I think the best way to get introduced to something is actually see it in operation. So let's do that. Okay, so the way we have this is we've run it, and again, you have different data than I do here, but that's okay. But we do want you to have set up this display output. Okay, so now what the first thing I'm going to do is introduce you to kind of the here, let me do this. Okay, I should have kept that open in MDN, because the first loop that often students learn is this for loop. But honestly, I think this for loop is a bit confusing, and there's just so many better ways now to write for loops. We will come back and write a loop like this. But it's got a lot in here. So it's like, let's go look at the for in, okay? Right? So we can write for ins on arrays. That's awesome, okay? So we could say for, sorry, not for in, but for of. So for variable in, and then again this says object, but it could be an array. So let's actually just write this first to see it. So this is new syntax, so for, and now what we're going to do is we're going to create a new variable that's going to be block scoped, and we're going to call it array, and you'll see why in a minute. Of, so this is a for of loop, CFP data. Open and close the block. This is going to iterate over the nested array, the multiple items in the array that are the arrays. And now what I want you to do first is log the array. Now, what do you think? How many times, how many outputs are we going to see just from this code? We've run it 3 times, so we should see 3 arrays. Let's go look at it. Okay, right here. This is the code right here. Okay, so what happens, and I'm going to hit a breakpoint right there. So the first time it goes through, it grabs the first array of this multi. You can see it here. Again, your DevTools is your friend here. Okay. I'm going to hit this, and it's going to output, and now it's running the loop that's looping through. The next time the array is, actually, let's go look, right? Actually, I think I have to hit one more. There we go. Because I hadn't actually stepped into the loop yet. As I stepped in, and that's what this step does, then it shows me the next array in this multi-dimensional array, which is the large. Okay, so just look at that output. Okay, just look at it and see if it at least starts to, be a little more clear. And spend a bit of time here looking at this code and the output. Again, DevTools is so much your friend here. All right, so now let's take this to the next step. Instead of just console logging it, let's actually output it to the page. And I'm going to do it with a little more code than what we've done before. I'm going to say const output is going to be equal to, we have a document dot, and we've seen a little bit of this. We've seen document query selector, but I'm going to use document get element by ID, and I'll show you why. And I'm going to actually call this output here. Okay. So what I'm doing is I'm getting a reference to, and in this case, something that has had an ID. If you don't know about IDs, it's very common in HTML, and in this case in JavaScript. I'm going to set up a div. I'm going to hit tab, say ID equal to output. So I'm basically saying, hey, I'm going to have a div, basically a space, right? And we could talk about what divs actually do, but at this point you're going to actually see them so we can look at them. And now I have a div. I don't have to have a space there, because the rest of what's going to get outputted here is we're going to write code to output this. This is the only HTML we have to write, which is this ID and the div. Now you could have done other things here, right? But div is kind of a nice, because it's just a container that we're going to put things in. Okay, so now come back over to my JS. So now that I have a reference, which by the way, let's actually look at that. Not a bad thing to look at as well. Okay, so if I put a breakpoint here, okay, and I let that run, if I go down here and I type output, notice what happens here. It actually is pointing, if you can see over here, to a div that doesn't have any data in it, but it's been in the HTML. And you can even in the HTML, I'll show you this in a minute, right click and inspect that div, because you've hard coded it. Okay, you've hard coded it here, you've given a pointer, a reference to it here, and now we're going to actually write some code that is going to update it. So I'm going to say new const new p, new paragraph, equal, and this is code you haven't seen before. Okay, document dot create element. So we're creating an HTML element. It's going to be a p, a paragraph. Now you could use other things here. Do play with this if you want. And now we're going to say new p.text content is going to be equal, and this is where we're actually going to create a string, okay, and in this case a template string that will then update into the browser. Okay, so let's first just do this. We're going to say carbon, okay, footprint total is, now in this case, which item in the array, let's just first do this. Do you remember how to do template strings, right? I'm looking for my $sign on my keyboard, right? Let's go back over here for a second. When I look at this, which of these items is my total? So I do ARR, because that's the reference to the array inside the for loop. Okay, 4. Interesting, right? Because that's the total. The 4th indices for that array, because when I'm iterating over it, I'm only referencing one array in that multi-dimensional array. Okay. So now that I've done that part, I've actually set up, because at this point I haven't updated the HTML yet. If we go over and run and let it do what it's trying, let's just let it run. I'm going to take off the breakpoint and let it run. Okay, there's nothing on my page, because all I've done here is create a new element, but I haven't done the last step, and that's where we do reference the div and say append child, okay, new p. So what we're doing here is we're iterating over that global multidimensional array. Each time we iterate over, the array is the individual time we've run it. We've then created a reference to the div, okay, which by the way we could do outside of the for loop, doesn't have to be done, but this does need to be done each time. We're going to create a new p, a new paragraph. We're going to say new paragraph dot text content. We're going to set up the template string, reference the array indices 4, and then we're going to append it into the child by saying look at the output, append child, add to that div, that new p. And look at this. That's what it did. Let me actually make that a little bigger. Okay? So your data is going to look different. But if you right click and inspect here, you can see here's a div and here's 3 paragraphs, 3 P's that are the output. So you've written JavaScript to update the DOM, and that's really the power of JavaScript. All right. So with this knowledge now, here's what I want you to do. I want you to then play with this and figure out a way to then either just update the template string to then reference the other data, right? The members of the household, the size of the house, right? The points for that. And we've already done this one, but figure out how you want to, either in a single one or kind of more fun maybe, is actually to create multiples or play with it. And again, ask for help. But if you just did one template string or one string that you then updated here would be fine. But if you want to play around with this, that's good too. Okay? So that's going to be your challenge. And the code that we're all going to play with together. And this is a whole, and my hope is that this is a good introduction, because next week we're going to talk about arrays, and this week you got we're going to talk about loops, and this week at the end of it you got introduced to loops, and you get to do a little more coding. But this kind of coding, template strings, you've done. The difference is, the new thing is how to reference the individual indices within the array. And this is different in the sense, or new in the sense that we're iterating over. And again, the more time you spend actually watching how this works in DevTools, the more you'll be likely to figure out a way to output this. Again, if it just is in one line, that's okay. All right, so like before, right? Update output, updated output, okay? You can do that, but in your post, right? So in your post, be clear, like if you need some help, right? Because you have, by now, hopefully you've seen that I go in and I look at code and I give you feedback for that too, right? And then come see me, come ask for help. There's just multiple ways, you know, the more you could really have some fun with playing with this output. What we have, again, you should have many more than I do. Okay, have fun with this, and I'll talk to you soon.